When Mary Kelley was just a little girl, her two older sisters nicknamed her Mary Sunshine. This is because every morning, as soon as the girls would wake up, Mary would leap out of bed and run around her house, pushing aside all the curtains, so every room in the Burley, Idaho home filled with sunshine. The nickname stuck because it not only captured her cute morning routine, but it also captured her sense of optimism, energy, and radiance that people associated with her for her entire life. But no one, not even her closest family, could have known the darkness that would one day eclipse that brilliant light. On a cold autumn morning in December 1974, a census worker named Harry Williams was making his rounds through the quiet suburbs of American Falls, Idaho. As he approached a modest, well-kept home on a tree-lined street, he noticed something was wrong. A strange, sweet, and sickly odor hung heavy in the air, a smell he couldn't quite place, but which made the hairs on his arms stand on end. The front door was slightly ajar, a silent invitation that felt more like a warning. He called out, "Hello, anyone home?" But his voice was swallowed by an unnerving silence. Hesitantly, he pushed the door open and stepped inside, a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The house belonged to 53-year-old Mary Kelley, a woman known throughout the community for her kindness, her devotion to her church, and her unshakable good cheer. But the scene that greeted Harry Williams was a horrifying contrast to the woman everyone thought they knew. The inside of the house was in a state of chaos, as if a violent storm had torn through it. Furniture was overturned, papers were strewn across the floor, and in the living room, a dark, unsettling stain marked the carpet. As Harry's eyes adjusted to the dim light, his gaze fell upon a sight so gruesome, so utterly macabre, that his mind struggled to process it. The source of the terrible smell became terrifyingly clear. Lying on the floor was the body of Mary Kelley. But this was not just a simple death. It was a scene of brutal, almost ritualistic violence that would leave even the most seasoned investigators speechless and baffled. Who was this woman? And who could have committed such a monstrous act against someone so beloved? The investigation into Mary Kelley's life would reveal a story far more complex and shadowed than the sunny exterior she presented to the world. It was a story of deep faith, hidden secrets, and a creeping paranoia that ultimately led to a tragic and violent end. To understand the mystery of her death, we must first go back to the beginning, to the bright, sun-filled rooms of her childhood home in Burley, Idaho, where she was known simply as Mary Sunshine. When Mary was born on October 11, 1921, Burley was just a small rural town in southern Idaho with a population of just over 5,000 people. Most of its residents, the Kelley family included, were farmers, and the main crops grown in the town were grains, sugar beets, potatoes, and alfalfa. Like her older brother and two older sisters, Mary loved living on her family's farm. The kids held barnyard rodeos. They had potato fights every fall after the harvest was done, and during the hot summers, they cooled off in the irrigation canal near their house. Mary's parents were devout Mormons, and this religion would always be central to Mary's life. Members of the Mormon Church, called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or LDS for short, believe their church is actually the original Christian church started by Jesus Christ, and brought back or restored in 1830 by LDS Church founder Joseph Smith Jr. The teachings of the church provided a strong foundation for Mary, a moral compass that guided her through her formative years and instilled in her a deep sense of community and purpose. As Mary grew, her bright personality and intelligence shone through. She was a top student, known for her quick wit and her ability to make friends easily. But even in her youth, there were subtle signs of a deeper, more anxious nature lurking beneath the surface. Friends would later recall that Mary could sometimes become intensely focused on perceived slights or injustices, worrying about them far more than seemed necessary. She held a black and white view of the world, a trait likely reinforced by her strict religious upbringing. In her mind, there was good and there was evil, right and wrong, and very little room for grey areas in between. This worldview, while providing her with a sense of security, also made her vulnerable to suspicion and fear. After high school, Mary's life seemed to follow a conventional and happy path. She married her high school sweetheart, a young man named Roy, and they soon started a family. They settled in American Falls, a town not unlike the one she grew up in, and became active members of their local LDS ward. For years, Mary was the picture of a happy wife and mother. She was a devoted homemaker, a loving parent, and a pillar of her community. She taught Sunday school, organized church fundraisers, and was always the first to bring a casserole to a neighbor in need. Her home was known for being a welcoming place, always filled with the smell of fresh baked bread and the sound of children's laughter. To the outside world, Mary Kelley was living the life she had always dreamed of. But behind the closed doors of her idyllic home, a quiet darkness had begun to take root. The first cracks in her carefully constructed world appeared in the late 1960s. Friends and family noticed a change in Mary. Her sunny disposition began to cloud over with a persistent anxiety. She started to express fears that seemed irrational and out of character. She became convinced that she was being watched, that someone was trying to harm her and her family. At first, her husband Roy and her children dismissed her concerns as stress or fatigue. But Mary's paranoia only grew, becoming more specific and more consuming. She believed she was the target of a vast, unseen conspiracy, though she could never quite articulate who was behind it or what they wanted. She began taking strange precautions. She installed extra locks on her doors and windows. She would check her car for listening devices before driving anywhere. She stopped answering the phone, convinced that her calls were being monitored. Her behavior became increasingly erratic. She would spend hours writing in journals, filling page after page with disjointed thoughts, fears, and accusations against unnamed enemies. Her once welcoming home became a fortress against a phantom threat. Her family, once the center of her world, became a source of suspicion. She accused her husband of being part of the conspiracy against her, a devastating blow that fractured their once strong marriage. Her church community, which had always been her rock, also became a target of her paranoia. She started to believe that certain members of her LDS ward were secretly working against her, using their positions of trust to spy on her and plot her downfall. She would confront fellow churchgoers with wild accusations, causing confusion and distress within the tight-knit community. Her once revered status as a devoted member began to crumble, replaced by a reputation for being unstable and difficult. The church leaders, at a loss for how to handle the situation, tried to offer her comfort and guidance, but Mary's mind was now a prison of its own making. She saw their attempts to help as further proof of the conspiracy, believing they were trying to silence her or have her committed. The strain on her family became unbearable. After years of trying to help her, of living in a constant state of fear and confusion, Roy made the heartbreaking decision to leave. The divorce was finalized in 1972, and it sent Mary spiraling further into her delusions. Now truly alone, her paranoia escalated to a fever pitch. She completely isolated herself, rarely leaving her home. The once immaculate house fell into disarray, mirroring the chaos in her mind. Neighbors would see her peering out from behind drawn curtains, her face etched with fear. The woman they once knew as the cheerful, kind-hearted Mary Kelley had all but disappeared, replaced by a frightened recluse haunted by enemies no one else could see. This was the state of Mary's life in the days leading up to that fateful December morning in 1974. The investigation into her murder was a journey into the labyrinth of her troubled mind. The crime scene was one of the most bizarre the local police had ever encountered. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting Mary may have known her killer or let them in willingly. The brutality of the attack was shocking, but what was even more perplexing were the strange, ritualistic elements. Strange symbols, their meaning unknown, were scrawled on the walls. Objects in the room were arranged in peculiar patterns, as if part of some dark ceremony. And a copy of the Book of Mormon was found lying open next to her body, a specific passage underlined in red ink. The detectives were faced with a multitude of questions. Was this a random act of violence, a home invasion gone horribly wrong? Or was it something more sinister? Did Mary's paranoia finally push someone to the breaking point? Or, in a more terrifying possibility, were her fears real all along? The police explored every possibility. They pored over her journals, trying to decipher the cryptic entries and identify the unnamed enemies she wrote about with such terror. The investigation hit one dead end after another. The physical evidence at the scene yielded few clues. The symbols on the walls didn't match any known occult or gang markings. The passage underlined in the Book of Mormon, a verse about betrayal and divine retribution, seemed significant, but its connection to the crime remained elusive. Many of the people Mary had accused in her journals were upstanding members of the community with airtight alibis. The case grew cold, and the gruesome murder of Mary Kelley became a dark local legend, a cautionary tale whispered in the quiet towns of southern Idaho. For years, the question of who killed Mary Sunshine remained unanswered. a haunting mystery that defied all explanation. It wasn't until decades later that a new look at the cold case, combined with advances in forensic technology, would shed new light on the mystery. But the truth, when it was finally revealed, was more shocking and tragic than anyone could have imagined. The answer was hidden in plain sight all along, buried within the pages of her own tormented writings and the fractured relationships she left behind. The story of Mary Kelley is a heartbreaking reminder that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are not the ones that hide in the shadows. The nickname that had so perfectly captured her radiant childhood spirit became a tragic irony, a bright memory of a light that was violently and mysteriously extinguished.